What is lunacy? What is insanity? In the 19th century, many tried to answer these questions. Some thought lunatics were people who lacked reason, but were conscious of their surroundings. Others believed lunacy occurred when blood wasn't reaching the brain. There were those who even said that when lunatics were violent, it was just nature's way of releasing excess energy. Perhaps the best definition comes from Dr. William Neville, who wrote that insanity was a generic word applied to functional derangement of the brain under extremely diversified and often even opposite behaviors. Regardless of the definition used, we know that the insane were sent to asylums. In France, a law was introduced in 1838 which allowed for the committal of the insane by their family or by prefects. In New York, in 1866, laws were passed that required that an insane person be sent by their family members to a state lunatic asylum. Asylums were supposed to treat and cure the insane through medical and moral treatments. But what happened behind closed doors? Look at the women committed to these asylums, and you find a different picture. The asylums contain women who had dared to question and disagree with their husbands over Christian ideology. Women whose families thought they had expressed too much grief, or too little. They had all challenged social norms through their actions or mere presence. Not only that, but the asylums frequently abused their patients, beating and whipping them. Investigations found patients living in squalor, naked and chained in their rooms. What were these asylums meant for then? Were asylums supposed to be treating the insane, or silencing those who challenged the status quo? Although there had been ways to handle the insane for centuries, asylums only came into existence in the 1800s. According to Sir William Charles Ellis, who ran county asylums for over 20 years and was knighted for his work, in England in 1838, there were 12,668 impoverished lunatics and idiots, and at least 10,000 insane people. We can recreate Hanwell, an asylum in Middlesex, from his treatise on insanity and the management of asylums. County asylums usually contained both men and women, placed in two different sections of the asylum. Men were treated and examined by the physician and house surgeon. For women, it was the matron and the surgeon's wife or a trained female physician. The patients had sleeping apartments at least 8 feet 6 inches long and 6 feet 9 inches wide, where they would sleep without clothes, and if epileptic, restrained so that they could not injure themselves. During the daytime, patients received medical and moral treatments. Ellis wrote that the most essential ingredient is constant, never tiring, watchful kindness. As the century went on, patients began to be employed within the asylum. Men often were taught some type of mechanical labor, such as shoemaking, while women made clothing. Patients made the beer and bread and helped with the laundry. Ellis wrote that it gave meaning to their lives as well as teaching them skills for life after the asylum. Out of the 612 patients in Hanwell, 454 were involved in work. The other 148 were mostly fatuous or physically unable to work. The few who were unwilling to work would be given no indulgences, such as beer. From 19th century advertisements, we also have information on a private asylum for upper-class women, Elms Courthouse. Compared to county asylums, private asylums had far more space for each patient, and the Elms Courthouse included sitting rooms, parlors, and even an aviary for foreign birds. These women would never work. Instead, they did calisthenic exercises, a type of rhythmic movement. The women would be treated with gentility and kindness befitting their station, to remind them what it meant to be a lady. But on closer examination, one can see the stigma which was attached to madness. The house's name avoids words like lunatic and asylum, and instead describes itself as a house for the nervously affected, and a place for ladies laboring under affections of the mind. The reviews emphasize its seclusion, and that only the immediate attendant would know the full details of the lady's illness. The ground map specifically mentions the 14-foot high brick wall which would surround the whole island, blocking anyone from viewing into it. Any behavior which would threaten the family name would be silenced within these walls. What afflicted the people who were committed to these asylums? Ledgers from asylums can give us a clue. They had head injuries, epilepsy, convulsions. In an ideal world, the basis for their committal would be insane behaviors and mannerisms. But the records of why women were committed show that other reasons often had a social or political narrative.
I was studied into the cause of her disease of the nervous system, and so far as I can judge, it was caused by her disregarding the laws of her nature as a woman. If women would have resolution enough to be quiet at such times as nature and reason both dictate, they would be relieved of a vast amount of suffering, which is inseparably connected with us trifling with this law of our nature.
One analyst claimed that male psychiatrists detected signs of mental illness when women acted in a way that did not embody female domesticity. According to another source, marriage diminished susceptibility to mental alienation for women. In 19th century France, the bourgeois feared women rejecting the secular and religious values of society. Women who criticized political men would be committed. The medical term for this was politicomania. There were also many instances in which female anatomy and sexuality are used to commit women to lunatic asylums. For example, Dr. Neville believed that women went insane because of the suppression of habitual bodily discharge in relation to that of female organs. He even noted that it was the maternal womb that caused mania and imbecility. In fact, the womb was very important when discussing female insanity. Some people thought that women were taken over by their devouring womb, which destroyed their mental health. So there was a general consensus that women had powerful nervous systems and uteri. Even masturbation was considered more alarming in women than in men. In fact, prostitution was linked with erotomania. In this way, female sexuality was thus silenced. It was socially controlled. These reasons show that often women were at the mercy of social norms. Defiance of these social norms led to the committal of normal women into insane asylums. Now let's take a look at the conditions and treatment within the asylums. Unfortunately, not all asylums were morally operated. Reports of neglect and abuse, often delivered by investigative exposés of undercover journalists, were common in state asylums that housed criminals or patients labeled incurable and beyond hope of rehabilitation. Bad economic turns were especially unfortunate for the mentally ill, as they were generally considered the least deserving when it came to appropriating tax dollars. Women who were committed by their husbands as an alternative to divorce often became even more unbalanced during their stay. Nellie Bly, an undercover journalist who stayed 10 days within the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum, had this to say about her treatment. Expecting torture would produce insanity quicker than this treatment? Here's a class of women sent to be cured. I would like the expert physicians who are condemning me for my action, which has proven their ability to take a perfectly sane and healthy woman, shut her up, and make her sit from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. on straight backbenches. Do not allow her to talk or move during these hours. Give her no reading, and let her know nothing of the world or its doings. Give her bad food and harsh treatment, and see how long it will take to make her insane. 2 months would make her a mental and physical wreck. Penniless people and those of criminal nature were often kept within cold and gloomy rooms, not much more comfortable than prison cells. These damp and filthy conditions were generally overcrowded and conducive to the rampant spread of disease. Heavy metal chains and iron cages were used to restrain easily excited patients, and if they were given beds, they were typically made of animal hair, infested with bugs and body lice. The male staff members of asylums were chosen for their brute strength and often had no medical knowledge. Patients who misbehaved or grew rowdy were quickly and harshly restrained. Patients were cuffed, strapped to restrictive wooden chairs, placed in straitjackets, chained to walls and each other, and often beaten or lashed. To many, the purpose of an asylum was to confine and conceal the insane, to protect their friends and family from the inconvenient embarrassment of their mental disabilities. According to Dr. William Brown, a well-published American psychiatrist, regarded as wild beasts, all maniacs were indiscriminately treated as such. Nay, the imprisoned tiger enjoys a milder fate, for his keepers have an interest in his health and preservation. Instead, incurable asylum patients were constrained without treatment or happiness, terrified, beaten, or starved into obedience, and gagged, verbally abused, and taunted by nurses. Female patients were more likely than male patients to refuse food, and were commonly forced to eat. Reports tell gruesome tales of spoon handles being used to pry a bound woman's throat open, teeth broken or pulled out to better facilitate food, and the head pried backwards to such a dangerous angle that the vertebrae was often dislocated. In an 1812 report, a surgeon visiting a private New York asylum declared that he had seen a harmless woman patient locked down with a wooden crib and horsewhipped, and he had seen her blood flow in rivers. He also reported that female patients were at the mercy of their keepers' lusts, as male attendants all had keys to the women's bedrooms. The treatment of the mentally disabled certainly varied from asylum to asylum, and factors such as class and gender greatly impacted these variations. Public asylums were government-funded and housed the poorest members of society, and thus often the poorest living conditions. Private asylums were a toss-up. Some were targeted at the upper class and built to act as gentle retreats of a rehabilitation, while other private asylums sought to maximize profit and operated without having to meet the already low standards of the government. Undoubtedly, many asylums treated the poorest and lowest of society as worse than animals. In the 19th century, the central question was this: were asylums used to help the mentally ill, or did they shield the status quo from dissenters? The controversy that surrounded 19th century mental asylums, whether they were there to help patients or to confine and conceal them from public view, led to their deinstitutionalization by the 1940s. Initially, this may be seen as fortunate, especially when we take into account the terrible conditions and abuse that mental patients were forced to endure within these hospitals. Yet this development left a gaping vacuum within our post-World War society as population rapidly increased without any designated framework for the care of the mentally ill. In our reluctance to reinstate a modified asylum system, which bears a shockingly heavy negative connotation, we have abandoned our mentally ill to either life in prisons or in the streets.